Good evening from New York. I'm Lawrence O'Donnell. Today, for the first time since Republicans captured control of the House in the midterm elections, President Obama met with congressional leadership from both parties to try to move forward on tax rates and new nuclear arms treaty with Russia. Yesterday, in advance of the meeting, President Obama proposed a 2-year freeze on federal worker pay, which had been originally put forward by Republicans and opposed by many Democrats. Despite that concession, Republicans remain cautious.
We had a very nice meeting today. Of course, we've had a lot of very nice meetings. The question is, can we find the common ground the American people expect us to find?
President Obama also agreed to assign Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner and Office of Management and Budget Director Jack Lew to meet again with a 4-person bipartisan group from the House and the Senate to find a compromise on extending current tax rates to families earning more than $250,000 a year. As the lame duck session gets underway, what moves are available to both parties and what are the likely outcomes? 10 people were at today's White House meeting, and tonight, in the Last Word exclusive, we'll talk to 2 people who were inside that room, a member of the House and a member of the Senate. First, I'm joined by House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer. Mr. Hoyer, in the meeting today, your reports indicate you were talking about the tax rates going forward. Obviously, also Senate leaders talking about the START treaty. What else was discussed in the meeting specifically? Did you discuss the DREAM Act? Did you discuss Don't Ask, Don't Tell as business to be conducted during the lame duck session?
Those matters were brought up as business items that we wanted to address, but you're correct in observing that the discussion largely related to the both the continuing resolution and/or an omnibus so that we can fund government for the balance of the fiscal year, and for the opportunity to discuss the tax bill or tax bills, so that we want to make sure that no middle-income individual in America gets a tax increase on January 1st. We want to move ahead on that. Obviously, the purpose of the meeting, which I thought was a constructive meeting, was to see where we can find common ground. And, Lawrence, I think we have common ground on the fact that I think all of us want to make sure that middle-income Americans do not receive a tax increase on January 1st. I'm hopeful that we can move forward on that on which we have found common ground.
Just quickly before we get back to taxes, on Don't Ask, Don't Tell and on the DREAM Act, a law that would allow undocumented students and young people in America who've been here before the age of 16, if they go to college or join the military, to get to a path to citizenship. On those 2 items, did you see any likelihood that they could be dealt with in the lame duck session?
Yes, I did. Now, as I say, I want to make it clear, we did not discuss that at any length. So I can't say from the meeting itself I took that impression. But I believe that certainly in the House we want to see this move forward. We think we're on a path to move it forward. I think the Senate wants to move it forward as well. And so that I do see a path.
On the tax strategy in the House of Representatives, is Nancy Pelosi going to force a vote in the House on the Democratic version of the tax rates, which would be an extension of current tax rates for incomes below $250,000 and an increase in the top tax rate above $250,000?
Lawrence, I would not characterize it as forcing a vote. I think we may well bring a bill to the floor which incorporates what we have said we think ought to happen, and that is to ensure that no middle-income person in America gets a tax increase on January 1st. We specifically made a provision for that when we passed the statutory pay-go bill some months ago, so that we have made no secret of the fact that we believe that the policy to make sure that the Republican bill, which sunsetted and sunsets this December 31st, and as a result, middle-income wage earners would receive a tax increase if we don't act. So it's not a question of forcing. It's a question that we believe we ought to act, we want to act, and we will act.
Do you see any flexibility in what will be the final compromise position? Because if you do have that vote, do you agree that that is a symbolic vote that has no chance of passing the Senate and no actual chance of passing the House?
Well, I'm not sure that it doesn't have a chance to pass the House. I wouldn't. I think we can pass it through the House. What I think is, obviously, in the Senate, there are discussions about a range of different alternatives. Senator McConnell made it very clear that the Republicans were absolutely opposed to delinking a tax cut for the wealthiest Americans from middle-income Americans. If that's the case, the senators and the House members will have to discuss alternatives. In fact, the President initiated, and we have responded to convening a group of representatives from the Democrats and the Republicans in the House, Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, to discuss ways forward on the tax issue.
Congressman Hoyer, why is $250,000 the top threshold? Why is that the definition of rich, according to the Democratic Party in the House?
I don't know that it's a definition of rich. It is a definition of, and obviously any figure is somewhat arbitrary, but $200,000 for individuals and $250,000 for couples was felt to be a figure at which reasonable people could conclude they were certainly middle-income wage earners and that they ought not to receive a tax increase.
Well, let's remember.
I don't think it's a question of definition of rich.
Let's remember where the $250,000 came from. It was in 1993 when the Democrats, and I was working in the Senate and the Finance Committee at the time, so I will say we, when we were defining $250,000 as the top bracket, having started with the concept of what we were then calling a millionaire's tax, but being Democrats, we pulled it down to $250,000. In the interim, with inflation, that $250,000 bracket set in 1993 with inflation now is $378,000. So if you want to maintain the same bracket as was determined in 1993 in real dollar terms, why don't you consider moving that bracket up to the realistic number of based on the 1993 plus inflation of $378,000, $400,000, something like that?
Well, look, Lawrence, I'm not sure I adopt your premise, but I understand what your hypothesis there of what happened in some years ago. But let me say this. The American public sent a message, I think, pretty clearly to every member that was running and to the Congress generally. They want really two things. They want us to create jobs, to expand the economy, and they want us to bring this deficit down. Obviously, in the short term, we need to make sure we grow the economy, invest in the economy. But in the longer term, we want to make sure that we do, in fact, bring down the deficit. Because if we don't bring down the deficit, not only will future generations be at risk, but we'll also have an economy that will be at risk. So we have, on the one hand, an effort to make sure that average working people, you could pick any figure, you're correct on that, but average working people below $250,000 don't get any increase in their taxes, so they'll have money to spend, money to invest in growing the economy. On the other hand, we think that we ought to also have an eye on the longer term to make sure that we do, in fact, have a stream of revenue that will help us bring this deficit under control. I think both objectives are critical, and yes, you can point out that we could pick any other figure as well.
Now, President Obama has delegated the Treasury Secretary, the OMB Director, to work with both members and staff, Republicans in the Senate and the House, and Democrats, to come up with a compromise of some kind on the tax rates. What shape do you think that compromise will ultimately take?
Well, Lawrence, I don't want to anticipate what shape it will take. Obviously, there are differences of opinion. As I said, Senator McConnell, the leader, Republican leader in the Senate, made it very clear that his caucus was united. That if there were not a cap on taxes for those making over $250,000, they would not be for capping any tax increase for those under $250,000. Within that context, obviously, this group was convened to have discussions as to where we can seek common ground, reach common ground, and move forward. That will be their intent. I don't want to prejudge what they will come up with, but obviously there are different perspectives, and those will have to be resolved.
House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, thank you very much for bringing us inside the room with you today in the meeting with the President.
Thank you, Lawrence.